I think my neighbor's cat warded off a skinwalker. My father died about 5 years ago unexpectedly from a heart attack. To say it was hard on my mother and I was an understatement. Our old house in Knoxville just didn't feel like home anymore. About a year later, Mom and I made plans to take ourselves and our elderly dog Ace on a move further south to a small town situated about a half hour from Atlanta. Just a few days before we were slated to move, however, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've ever come to experience. All that was within my dream was my bedroom, a picture-perfect recreation of the real thing. I sometimes wonder if I was in some sort of sleep paralysis state when it occurred. To further add to the dream's realism, in the middle of the night the street lights right across the street would illuminate through my window, creating a light reflection on the wall perpendicular. In my dream, as I lay there staring at that exact reflection on the wall, I saw an orb of smoke fade in from the shadows. Goosebumps chilled across my skin, as I lay there panicked and afraid to move a muscle. Suddenly, it stopped moving and steadily hung in the light's reflection, as if it was staring at me. Without warning, it spoke to me, in my dead father's voice. "I'm sending something to watch you." Despite hearing my father's voice come from the orb, I was terrified of it. I didn't know why. And yet, I managed to squeak out a small reply towards it. "What?" I whispered. The orb remained silent for a few moments, leaving an eerily dead silence in the voice's place. Just as quickly, it spoke to me one final time. "Damn. Black." I woke up almost instantaneously, gasping for breath. The nightmare had chilled me to my core. I didn't know exactly what to make of it, especially those two final words. I chalked it up to maybe Dad wishing us well on our move, but at the time, I couldn't shake the feeling it was some kind of warning. Within the next couple weeks, my mother and I moved out of Knoxville and headed down south to Georgia. She had managed to find a quaint little house for us. With only one or two neighbors down a gravel road in the middle of the woods, it was a nice fit for us. Probably the best reliever of all the stress that came with the move, however, was our new neighbor's cat. She was a petite older black cat that gravitated towards me almost instantly, and I treated her as if she was my own pet. I left out a can of food once or twice a week for her, and even if I didn't call out for her, when she saw me outside, she would always run up to me. She helped ease my tensions about leaving Knoxville behind, especially without Dad there with us. Less than a month into our new house, I awoke suddenly to a faint coughing noise that sounded like it was coming from downstairs. One important thing to know about our dog Ace is that he has a collapsed trachea. He needs medicine to help calm the condition down, so I'm used to waking up in the middle of the night to give him his medicine. I proceeded downstairs from my bedroom to give him his cough medicine, but I couldn't find him anywhere throughout the house. He wasn't in his bed sleeping, he wasn't in the kitchen, he was nowhere to be found. I didn't check Mom's bedroom, however, as to avoid waking her up. Besides, I wouldn't have heard the coughing if he had been in there anyway, so I just let it be. That's when I heard the cough again, but it was coming from further away, as if from outside. I looked over at the side patio door leading out into the woodlands, and realized I had forgotten to shut it. There it stood, slightly ajar. Shit, I thought to myself, he got out. I immediately ran outside with a flashlight and started calling out for my dog. "Ace, Ace," I shouted into the neighboring trees. I heard another cough and shined my light in its direction. That time, it had echoed from down the gravel road. I swear, a path had never looked so terrifyingly desolate before in my life than that night, as I stared down the same gravel road that had led us to our new home. But in that moment, I thought my dog was lost, and I chalked it up to new house jitters, so I pressed onward. "Ace, come on boy. Home's this way, buddy." That's when I heard it, the cough that I had been following, almost right beside me. But this time, it didn't stay like the dry cough I had been hearing. Instead, the cough had slowly descended into a low growl. I shined my light towards the new sound. There stood a bright red fox in the middle of the path. For a moment, I figured it was some kind of sick fox I had mistaken for my dog. The whole time, as I was processing what I was seeing, it stared directly at me. Its eyes glowed from the light of my flashlight. However, our stare broke when it tilted its head to the right. I looked down, and there she was, our neighbor's little black cat standing beside me. However, it was as if she had completely changed persona. She was no longer the happy, affectionate cat I had come to know. Instead, she had her back arched upright, every fiber of hair standing at attention, and uttered the lowest growl I had ever heard come out of a feline. In that moment, I figured she was just scared of the fox, so I knelt down beside her in a bid to coax her away and avoid the fox hurting her. But no matter how many times I tried to coax her out of fight mode, she wouldn't budge. Her stare remained unfazed. That's when I looked towards the direction of the fox once more, but there wasn't a fox standing there anymore. Instead, in the exact same spot of that gravel road, was a walking, rotting corpse of a roadkill coyote, slowly moving towards me. I took a step back, absolutely horrified of what I was seeing. Its jaw was hanging loose from its face, one of its eyes was stained with blood, and it wobbled back and forth, as if it was desperately fighting pain. I rubbed my eyes out of disbelief, hoping I was imagining it. But it was still there when my eyes reopened. Despite the gruesome sight before us, our neighbor's black cat, no matter how tiny she was, stood there and kept growling at the creature. Suddenly, it stopped. The creature had ceased its walk towards us. For a moment, it just stood there, glancing back and forth between myself and this little black cat that was trying to defend me. That's when I unmistakably heard this beast mutter two solemn words, in a low gravelly voice. "Damn. Black." In a flash, the creature ran straight into the woods. I shined my flashlight in its direction, but it had completely vanished. Even the brush it had ran through looked untouched. That's when the cat, still standing beside me, calmed herself down. Almost as if nothing had happened, she rubbed herself up against my leg, returning to her normal, loving mood. Despite technically not being mine, I proceeded to scoop her up and run back into the house. Before heading upstairs with a little black cat snuggled up in my arms, I decided to poke my head into my mother's room. Laying on the floor, sound asleep, was Ace. He had been there the entire time. I quietly closed her door before bolting upstairs. I made sure that little cat slept with me in my bed that night. From the research I've done, I think I was almost a victim of some kind of skinwalker. It must have picked up the sounds my dog sometimes makes late at night, knowing I'd likely come to his aid. For whatever reason, our neighbor's black cat had scared it so badly, it scrambled away. I haven't seen it since that night, maybe because that same cat still likes to wander down the gravel road late at night, or maybe that thing just decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Either way, whether I have my father or pure luck to thank, I leave a can of food out every single night for that little black cat. And the most ironic part of it all, that cat's name is Halloween. My grandfather saw a skinwalker. My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard, in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon was clear, and each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his wide dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. "Way back when I was a boy, about your age," he began, "I lived outside an Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He had returned from the war and set about raising horses and cattle on 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside, with dirt good for growing thorn brush and not much else. One night, my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek, and some old abandoned farmsteads. The fire sparked, and a log cracked, jolting me out of the story. What next? I asked. Settle down, boy, you'll hear soon enough. Pa and I were driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember too, when the engine began to sputter, and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. "God damn it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road, as it coasted to a halt. "Stay here, son," as he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy, and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelled it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up carrion, like one of them dead bloated cattle that would drop from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes in their hide to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk, and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too, the back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get hot. The wind stopped blowing and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. "Pa," I called. "Pa, Pa." No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I never felt fear like this, not until Vietnam, not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over for my pa door and saw a shadow bound across the road, through both dim beams of light, across the partly open domed hood. Grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco spit off to his side, and he looked pensively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath and gasped for air. The night was cool, but I was sweating and clammy. "Well, what happened? What about your father? What did you see?" He sighed. "A creature." He shook his head. "You have to understand, there were legends, older than the rock cairns out in the valley, older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old Indian chiefs and their shamans. The Apache, and Hop, and Cherokee, and all them old tribes and First Peoples, they told tales, old stories, about dark Indian magic, a deal made with the old spirits, of blood sacrifice, to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other, and the Spaniards, and later the white men that came for their land and women. They called them." He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath, and bodied forward into his tale. Across the fire, and the sky, the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun, and old mountains, he bodied forward. They called them skinwalkers, shape changers. Old warriors resurrected as skinless men, all sinew and muscle, walking on deer legs, with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote. But messed up, boy, long and malformed snouts, teeth like a bowie knife, long arms, and standing 7 feet, even hunched over. They'd gut the old cowboys and white riders, they'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. Wily too, they could change their voice to match a person you knew or might know. Boy, that's what I saw. Big and fast, only for a second, it ran across the road. Gray and mottled. Muscle flexing under its legs, hooves clumping on the road, stringy muscled hunched shoulders. And it turned. Looked right into the cab, looked right into my eyes, and I swear, boy, I swear it grinned at me. I sank into my seat, in shock, in fear, shaking. I knew death was near. The air was electric, I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree to smithereens. Charged and full with power. I yelled for my pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I was shaking, as grandfather told his story. He was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but also their skin, that's why the gods took their hide. So, they could take others. Not for long, the legends say. Maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell, before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened, and I jerked my head to the left, putting my fists up to fend off attack. "Son, it's me," my father said, before climbing into the cab. He grasped the steering wheel and pulled himself in awkwardly, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed all them camps. And now I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run, or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your ma." As he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it out onto the road, and our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom? No, boy, I knew, because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running 50 miles an hour right next to the car, looking at me with them yellow eyes and grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next us, boy. My pa kept his eyes on the road, locked straight forward. Son, he said, don't look at it, don't look at it. That's how I knew, boy. This isn't a Skinwalker story. In those kinds of stories, the Skinwalker follows rules. If you don't fall for its tricks, if you don't walk off into the bushes with your friend who vanished for 2 hours and then came back acting strange, then you'll be fine. For some reason, the Skinwalker can't touch you. It can peek out at you from behind a tree and talk to you, but if you leave quickly and make sure you stick close to your friends, it'll leave you alone. So, like I said, this isn't a Skinwalker story. This happened in late July, in a forest in Montana. Although this was the same forest my dad and I hunted in every year, that didn't mean much. It was wild and huge, stretching for miles and miles across rolling hills until it finally merged with the backs of the Rockies. We had one small patch of forest whose trails he and I knew well, and which my dad didn't like to go far from. He used to joke that we'd take a wrong turn on a path one day and come out from the woods to find 10 years had passed and we were in California. But that year I had been impatient and bored with our usual hunting trails. I was supposed to go to college that fall, and I was anxious to shake off the parts of my life I saw as childish and start fresh as a man. I was the one who picked out a new set of trails that were further into the woods and argued with my dad until he wore down and agreed to try them out. Right from the start, the trip was a disaster. It was an unusually hot summer that year, and by the time we unloaded our gear from my dad's truck and started on the trail, I had already sweat through my deodorant. About 30 minutes into the first day, I realized there was something off about the woods. They were totally silent, not even birds were singing. The only sounds were the wind blowing through the trees and our own footsteps. I've never before or since seen the woods that quiet. We didn't come across any animals that day. To tell the truth, I tried to hide it from my dad, but it was creepy. We camped in a clearing by the trail that I'd marked on our map. By this point, I was honestly ready to call it quits. Between the heat and the strange silence in the woods, I didn't want to be out there anymore, but this trip had been my idea, and I wanted my dad to be the one to call it off. He didn't, and after a supper of ham and beans, we spent a sleepless night in the hot tent. It was around noon of that second day we noticed the smell. We were making our way up the trail when it seemed like somebody flipped a switch and turned the forest on its head. We were both hit with a wave of stench like a rotting animal, which by the strength of the smell, seemed very close by. At the same time, the silent woods were filled with sounds. All around us birds were shouting warnings like an alarm. We stopped dead in our tracks and heard something crashing quickly through the underbrush to our right. Turning, I saw a herd of deer running at top speed through the thick bushes. My rifle was slung over my back, but even if I'd had it in my hands, I wouldn't have been able to react in time. After a pause, my dad spoke. "We need to turn back," he spoke. "Something's frightening the animals. Could be a bear." I nodded. Bears, although not common in our area, were not unheard of. I remembered 2 hunting seasons ago a couple of hikers had been attacked and killed on the other side of the state by what people were saying was a huge grizzly. Even with our rifles we wouldn't necessarily be safe against a big bear. We made our way back up the trail, but even as the sounds of the animals died down around us, the smell didn't go away. On the contrary, it seemed to get stronger and stronger all the time, until we were both covering our noses with our shirts and taking gasping breaths through our mouths. There was a change in the atmosphere too. Everything felt heavy and slow and somehow charged. Once, when I was a boy, lightning struck a tree not 200 feet away from me. This felt like that had. Like something was about to happen. We were about a day and a half's walk from our car, and even though we both wanted to get out of there as fast as possible, when night fell, we knew better than to try and follow a strange trail in the dark. We made camp by the trail. We didn't light a fire. My dad didn't say anything, but there was a tension in his shoulders, and his head swiveled quickly at every sound. We were hunched on a log, eating cold beans out of a tin, and wondering how we were going to sleep when we heard it. Down the path, further than I could see in the dark, there came a low groan. Immediately, Dad and I had our hands on our guns. The stench somehow grew again. It was overwhelming now, and I swear I could feel it in the air around us, sitting thick and oily on my skin. Another low groan, like a man sighing, and as I peered up the path, I saw a dark shape. It was low to the ground and big. It was waddling on all four, but something about its movement seemed unnatural. It looked the way a big man does when he crawls on his hands and knees, like every movement, if forced and stiff. My dad stepped between me and the path. "Bill," he spoke, "go into the woods and hide. Don't come out. I'll take care of the bear." I'd like to say I stayed. I'd like to say I told my dad I would never abandon him. I would at least like to say I tried to argue. Sometimes, very late at night when I can't sleep, I lie awake and think about what could have been if I hadn't been a coward. But those thoughts belong to the night, they are only dreams. I was about 1,000 feet away from our campsite when I heard the shots 1-2 in the night, practiced and controlled. I didn't stop. I was crying then, and I couldn't stop until I ran through a clearing on a small hill and tripped, rolling down into the underbrush. I stayed still down there, sobbing uncontrollably. I don't know how many shots my dad fired. I don't remember when the screaming started, or how long it lasted, only that it seemed to go on forever, and that it didn't sound like my dad, more like a woman in a horror movie. I don't know how long after the screaming stopped that I heard it, running through the underbrush, moving faster than that awkward, unnatural thing on the trail should have been able to move. But I do remember what it looked like when it burst out of the woods and crested the hill, white patches of flesh gleaming out from holes in the skin it was wearing. I remember seeing its yellow eyes peering out through the holes in what looked like a hairy burlap sack on its head. It reached the crest of the hill and stopped for a moment, stretching its body in the moonlight. I remember what it sounded like when it yelled, its voice like my dad's when he was hoarse and tired. "Bill," yelled the thing on the hill. "That's not a bear. Bill, that's not a bear." That isn't my brother. No one seems to notice. Not my mom, not my dad, not my sister. No one but me. My brother Daniel was sitting in front of me, tapping the table with his right index finger. You wouldn't have noticed this, but my brother taps the table with his left index finger. He always does. It's been 2 weeks since my 13th birthday. It was the same day he announced he was going to leave for university soon, and the same day he started acting differently. It was little things most people wouldn't notice. But Daniel and I are close. We never left each other's sides. So, I picked on it quickly. He was amazing at crash team racing, not so much for me. He knew that, so he would pretend to be bad and let me win a lot. But whenever I play with him now, it's like he never touched a video game before. He pretends he's playing badly on purpose, but it wasn't pretending. He loved pasta with cheese and chicken, but when my mom brought it out, he would seem just mildly happy. We rarely had it, and whenever we did you would be able to see the excitement on his face. He was sleeping on his back quietly with the closet open. We slept in the same room for as long as I can remember. He used to sleep on his right side and snored like an animal every day. He always shut the closet open for me. I always saw something standing whenever I woke up in the middle. He never found anything in the closet, but I swore to him I always saw something, so he promised to shut it every night for me. But he stopped after my birthday. Something is wrong. This isn't my brother. I just know it. I'm planning to take it down. But I have to make sure this isn't my brother. I have an idea. I will test him. I know Daniel will have no problem passing the test. He always loved going on adventures with me, so I invited him to come with me. He was busy on his computer, saying he's busy with his university application. But I insisted until he came with me. We went to an abandoned building not so far from my house. We came to his building years ago. We explored the rooms together. They were dusty, creepy, and unsettling. But I cared more about finding out if this person was my brother. We arrived at an empty small room with an infinity symbol drawn with chalk. Daniel drew it when we came here years ago. I was afraid Daniel would leave me. He told me he would be here for me forever as he drew it, saying his love for me equals infinity. I asked Daniel if he knew who drew it or knew what it was. He said he didn't know who drew it, and it means infinity. Now, I'm sure. This isn't my brother. This person is an impostor. I have to take care of him. The night settled, and silence filled our house. Everyone was asleep. I was in the kitchen, sharpening the knife my mom always used. I watched my mom do it a lot. I wasn't good at it, but it was better to make sure that thing is dead. I stood next to my brother's bed as he slept quietly. I held the knife with a firm grip. I prayed to God, any God. He would snore, and I would be wrong. I stood there for a second, waiting for it, but all there was silence. It was dark. I didn't know what happened. It's like my entire world became dark as I raised the knife. I couldn't see, hear, or feel. It's like I stopped existing. Moments later, I was on the ground. I heard screams of agony and pain. Daniel was bleeding. Wait. No. He's supposed to be a monster. Why was he bleeding like a normal human? Why does his screams sound like his screams when he was hurt? My dad and mom barged in. Everything happened so fast. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged by the police. Was I wrong? Did I just try to murder Daniel? Why? Why did I even think of doing this? My mind was flooded. I was filled with guilt. It's been 3 months since that incident. I was admitted to a mental facility. I haven't spoken a word after the incident. What I did never left my mind for even a second. My parents haven't visited me yet, and Daniel would have left for university tomorrow if I didn't stab him. I was told I had a visitor. I was laying on my bed as I heard the door open. It was Daniel. He was wearing a medical eye patch. I couldn't even look in his direction, feeling the guilt killing me. He sat next to my bed as he started talking. I didn't want to hear his voice, but I couldn't stop listening. He was asking how I was doing, if the facility was nice, if I needed anything. I couldn't muster a response. I heard Daniel ask for a hug. I couldn't stop myself from breaking down and crying. I hugged him as he comforted me. I told him he acted differently. He didn't spend as much time as he used to. He even forgot the symbol he drew for me. I thought he was a monster or someone pretending to be him. I felt his hand rubbing on my back. "You're not wrong," he said as I cried. "Wait. What?" I let go of the hug slowly, confused. I asked if he could repeat it. He did. He said I wasn't wrong. I'm not wrong. I must be imagining it. He grabbed my hand and handed me something. I couldn't move my eyes away from it. It was an eye. Daniel's eye that I stabbed. It was cut in half. My hand started shaking as I looked up. Daniel was smiling ear to ear, literally. His smile was so wide it was inhuman. His hand grabbed his face and pulled it upwards like it was a mask. What the fuck is that? That wasn't my brother, that wasn't even human. But it was wearing Daniel's skin. It sounded like Daniel, but it wasn't human. I know what the hell I was looking at. It was the thing I always saw in the closet. I screamed and cried as he let go of me. Nurses came in, trying to calm me down as that thing got up to leave. He smiled as he waved goodbye. That thing isn't my brother. The Skinwalker is coming, nothing can stop him. I've been hiding out for a long time. I've lost count of just how long. Days, weeks, maybe even months. While I have time, I'll tell you my story before it finds me. My name is Ryan Everdeen. I'm an average guy, with no unusual traits or features, except the fact that I have an extreme fascination with all things supernatural, which is what led me to being here now. If you think I'm lying, don't waste your time here. Get out before you've seen my story, before you become its target. Have you ever heard the rule, never go in the woods alone, especially at night? If not, it's likely you knew it from common sense. Hell, I wish I had known better. There's a place in my hometown called the Midnight Circle, a place that is said to be the home of an extremely powerful skinwalker. It's a grove located deep in the mountains, and you'd have to be extremely lost to find yourself there. I, being the supernatural nut that I am, had the great idea to go there late at night, alone. Stupid idea, I get it. I had it well planned out, charms and blessings to protect myself, and I almost managed to beat the creature at its game. After many hours of walking, I couldn't find the circle, and gave up. I collapsed against a tree trunk and fell asleep, somewhere in the woods. I have no idea how long I slept, but when I woke, I was not where I had fallen asleep. I found myself in a grove of trees, and I could hear something at the far end of the grove, but I couldn't see it. A sudden fear took hold of me, and I knew it had discovered me. I heard a rushing noise, and there it was, a terrifying, immensely tall creature. It appeared to be a cross of a minotaur and a dryad, and had holes where its eyes should have been. The creature stared at me and let out a ghastly sound. A screech that I felt in my bones. I see, you don't understand demonic. Nevertheless, I will tell you the same. You have intruded on my domain, and I will now tear your flesh from your bones, and make a meal of you. The Skinwalker said this in a slimy, foul voice. "WW, who are you?" I said, letting the fear take hold of me. "I am Aestromolv, the Lord of Skinwalkers, the King of Wendigos, and the Reaper of Flesh." The Skinwalker was ready to pounce, to tear me apart, but it couldn't, because I had my protections. I began to move my head ever so slightly to look for an escape, but the Skinwalker had predicted this. "Foolish human, I may not be able to kill you, but you're trapped here. The seventh dimension is my home, and you can never leave. I will not play your games, demon. I will leave this wretched place and never return." I spat back at it. I was growing angry. This is what he wanted me to do. As I looked around, I noticed an area where the darkness didn't seem as dark, and I decided to head there when I distracted it. "I shall look for an escape, since you cannot touch me here." The Skinwalker did not reply, which made me feel uneasy. My unease grew when the Skinwalker drew back and gestured towards the lighter darkness. "Be my guest," it hissed, sliding farther away, with a grin upon his face. I stood up and looked directly at the Skinwalker, maintaining eye contact while heading towards what I presumed was the exit. I stepped through the odd light patch and jolted awake. I had fallen asleep, admit it all been a dream, I assured myself. I stood up and began to bolt out of the woods when I heard the bone-shivering cry again. It had not been a dream. I had let the Skinwalker into the world, and it would be after me. In my panic I forgot that a Skinwalker can follow you anywhere, in any realm, even through your dreams. I could hear trees crashing to the ground as a new creature formed to chase after me. A giant four-legged beast grew above the trees, and it began to search for me. I kept bolting, and came to a road, hoping someone would pass by. To my luck, a truck passed by, and I jumped in front of it. I hopped in the passenger seat and told him I'd give him $100 if he got me to an airport as fast as possible. I am currently traveling abroad under a false name, which I will not reveal here in case any of you are found by him. If you have advice, share it, because I have very little ideas as of what to do now. My Skinwalker story. Arizona. Okay, so to start out, I live in Mesa, Arizona, which is basically Phoenix, Arizona, because the main cities of Arizona spread out into many sites with no border in between. Mesa is what I would call the suburbs of Phoenix. I changed my name, of course. I live in an apartment complex I would describe as close to the ghetto but still nice. I live in a bedroom, one bathroom apartment with my girlfriend. Arizona is a state full of ancient Native American history. I live next to a Hohokam Canal, as do many Arizonians. The whole place used to be cities of ancient Native Americans. The point is I'm in the area for what I believe to be a Skinwalker. I'll get to my story. Yesterday, I was drinking. One of the things I picked up during the COVID-19 quarantine. And I decided to smoke a bowl on my apartment patio, which I don't usually do, mind you. I just finished loading up my pipe and taking the first hit when I hear a voice, somewhere nearby. "Amanda, open the door please." It was a young, probably in the 20s girl's voice talking, and it sounded calm and teasing. It continued on as I tried to ignore it, smoking my last bud. After about 4 times of it repeating itself, my curiosity caused me to look for the source. I saw in an apartment building facing across from me movement. I saw a dog standing on its hind legs leaning on a door. Tapping. At first I shrugged, of course. Then I hear the voice again. It sounded exactly the same as last time. Exactly the same, as if you recorded their voice and that sentence and replayed it once again. There wasn't any other sound or movement in the complex. I watched the thing knock on Amanda's door for like 30 seconds in what I would call a state of shock and curiosity. Then it stopped and didn't move for another 20 seconds, until the dog stood all the way up, away from the doorway, on its hind legs and turned to face me. It made eye contact with me, which is weird because we were at least 50 yards away. I'm on the 3rd floor, it's on the 2nd, but I felt it looking at me. I held its eye contact. I was so scared, I felt like I should run. Then it got on all fours and headed down the stairs slowly. At the bottom it started slowly walking over to me. I was on all fours now, about to go inside or scream, I don't know. But I had to know what this thing was going to do. It walked close to my balcony. Yes, it was a dog, a brownish yellow, dirty looking thing, with big eyes that were 100% attentive to mine. It didn't seem natural, to be honest, but nothing looked wrong at a glance, except that it was staring into my eyes and wouldn't stop. I ran inside as it reached the bottom of my stairs and locked my doors. Soon I heard clawing at my door, doggy clawing. Next I heard the door handle jiggle, then it started on my porch door. I of course never answered. Instead I hid behind my kitchen counter with a knife. After about 30 minutes it left. I stayed up all night, but I didn't see it again, and I didn't go out again. I'm hoping it doesn't come back. I haven't gone outside at night again. I'm burning sage and trying to be careful as I can.